How's it going, guys? Today we are going to be jumping into something just a little bit different. It's a history documentary that I have been wanting to do for a while, but just haven't had really the gumption to do it because I wasn't sure how you guys would react. So I'm going to be doing it today, and hopefully you guys enjoy it. So today we're going to be jumping into World War II, the emergence of Nazism and the Holocaust. The Jewish story unpacked. So with that, let's jump into the video. But first, if you could do me a favor, go down, hit the like, the subscribe, the little bell icon at the top. That would be fantastic. Also, if you donate to the channel, you can do that by going down, hitting the super thanks button at the bottom, or clicking any one of the links at the top of the video that say click here to donate. Now, I am a history buff, so I probably will be stopping and explaining things throughout the video. So if you don't like it, too bad. Click out. Do what you want to do. So, without further ado, let's go.
In the first half of the 20th century, Germany was the preeminent intellectual and cultural capital of the world, and Jews were well-integrated citizens. The emergence of Nazism and its leader, Adolf Hitler, changed Europe and led to the greatest destruction that the Jewish people have ever faced: the Holocaust. During the 1920s and 1930s, despite continuing anti-Semitism and occasional pogroms, Jewish communities were a large component of European society. Cities, villages, and towns across Europe boasted significant Jewish populations. In Germany, Jews were leading academics, artists, and politicians, as well as teachers, doctors, farmers, and shopkeepers. During this time, a fringe political movement began gaining ground in Germany, promoting an extremely racist nationalism. They were called the National Socialist Workers' Party, or Nazis, and their leader.
Now, those of you that don't know, today we have had multiple political parties that have taken the same name as what the Nazis are. Bernie Sanders being one of them. He called himself the National Socialist Party. That's Nazi. Like, it can't be any more clear than it stands for Nazi. That's where it came from. That's where it originated. And so with the building up of troops within the Nazi party, it just becomes an inevitability that the Nazis grow to power.
Germany, promoting an extremely racist nationalism. They were called the National Socialist Workers' Party, or Nazis, and their leader was a man named Adolf Hitler. Anti-Semitism was foundational to their ideology. In his
And the funny thing is Adolf Hitler wasn't even German. He was Austrian, but he loved the German people so much that he became a German by proxy. He wasn't, like I said, he was not a German. He was an Austrian that immigrated to Germany.
Leader was a man named Adolf Hitler. Anti-Semitism was foundational to their ideology. In his infamous book Mein Kampf, Hitler called the Jewish people a noxious bacillus that lives as a parasite in the body of other nations. "Once I really am in power," Hitler declared in 1922, "my first and foremost task will be the annihilation of the Jews." In spite of rising support, Hitler and the Nazis initially failed to gain much ground in German parliament. It was not until after the economic collapse of 1929 that the party began to gain real political power. Social turmoil and strife led to a polarized and unstable political climate, and very quickly the Nazi Party became the largest faction in the Reichstag. In January of 1933, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. 1 month later, the Nazis claimed that a fire at the Reichstag was started by communists planning an insurrection and used the fear of a communist takeover to abolish constitutional protections. Shortly thereafter, Hitler was given the right to govern without the consent of parliament, effectively establishing a Nazi dictatorship in Germany. On September 15, 19...
Now, where does that sound familiar? Oh, right, the Democratic Party. That's where that comes from. That's what reminds me of it. Okay. Because, see, we didn't elect Harris as the DNC's nomination. They just installed her. because Biden couldn't do it anymore. He's too old, too stupid. And the way that their policies are pushing forward is very reminiscent of the Nazi Party. It's embarrassingly similar.
Actively establishing a Nazi dictatorship in Germany. On September 15, 1935, the Nazis passed a series of notoriously racist laws called the Nuremberg Laws, which stripped Jews of their German citizenship, removed all of their political rights, and legally institutionalized their persecution. Many Jews attempted to flee the country, though their options of where to go were very limited. In September of 1939, Germany invaded Poland, officially beginning World War II. In the wake of German military expansion, a campaign of mass murder was carried out on the Jewish population. In towns and villages occupied by the German army, German military and police units, the most infamous being the SS, were instructed to carry out a war of annihilation on the Jews. Nazi soldiers, often with the help of local collaborators, rounded up Jewish men, women, children, and the elderly, took them to mass graves, and shot them to death, murdering roughly 2 million Jews within just a few years. To separate and control...
That number is highly skewed. It was more like 3.5 million Jews. Like, it was a lot. Germans didn't have very good bookkeeping when it came to the number of Jews, gays, blacks, any persons that was not in the image of the Third Reich, which was an Aryan race of blonde-haired, blue-eyed strength. But the ironic part is Hitler had brown hair, brown eyes. So he himself didn't match the picture of perfection that he was pushing forward. And it was ironic and very, very funny to me that he even had the gall to do that. Let's get back at it.
Murdering roughly 2 million Jews within just a few years. To separate and control the Jewish population, the Nazis forced Jews into ghettos, small areas of cities and towns that were walled off from the rest of society.
That was just the start of it. Just the beginning. Was walling off the cities in Poland so that the Jews couldn't escape. And then what they would do is they'd just put them all to work in armory factories and anything that would support the German war effort. Because Chamberlain, who was the prime minister at the time, when Hitler invaded Poland, decided in his ultimate wisdom it was okay to come over and try to create a peace treaty between England and the Nazis. The Nazis in this treaty were not supposed to expand beyond Poland. But we all know how that turned out. And if you don't, they expanded past Poland by a lot.
The Nazis forced Jews into ghettos, small areas of cities and towns that were walled off from the rest of society. In 1941, it became law that Jews were required to wear a Star of David to identify them at all times. Disease in the ghettos spread like wildfire, and starvation was rampant. In January of 1942, Nazi leadership and representatives from various government ministries...
It's completely and totally unacceptable that humans can treat other humans like that. Like, you see a child that is obviously hungry, emaciated, just completely devoid of any kind of muscle mass whatsoever, and he's just sitting on the street. It's like, by natural instinct, you'd want to help that child, you know, go get him food, do whatever. But it's incredible to me the ruthlessness and the evil that came along with the German Nazi Party during World War II.
In January of 1942, Nazi leadership and representatives from various government ministries met at what came to be known as the Wannsee Conference to coordinate their efforts toward the efficient annihilation of the Jewish people, known as the Final Solution. Deportations to the death camps became the Nazi regime's primary tactic of mass murder. Jews were sent in cattle cars to places like Belzec, Sobibor, and Treblinka, forced into chambers they were told were showers, and gassed to death. Some camps, such as the infamous Auschwitz-Birkenau complex, doubled as labor and death camps, where Jews were forced to work and were then sent to the gas chambers to be murdered. This assembly line of mass murder continued for years, with thousands of Jews murdered every day. In the midst of this mass murder and destruction, despite impossible odds and relentless brutality, many Jews resisted. In the ghettos and camps, prisoners carried out acts of sabotage, smuggled weapons, and organized uprisings. Some fled to the forests, where they formed partisan units, bands of guerrilla fighters that often included both Jewish and non-Jewish fighters united against Nazism. These partisan units blew up trains, sabotaged Nazi operations, and fought head-to-head against German soldiers. Uprisings were waged in numerous ghettos, including in Krakow, Vilna, Bialystok, and Minsk. Spiritual resistance was also present throughout the ghettos and camps. Through observing holidays, studying Torah, upholding Jewish values, creating art, writing poetry, singing songs, spiritual resistors maintained dignity and upheld the strength of the human spirit even in the face of violent hatred, cruelty, and dehumanization. Throughout 1943 and 1944, the Nazis—
That's a perfect way of putting it. Dehumanization. It's putting blinders up to the atrocities that are going on right in front of your eyes and just pretending that you don't know anything about it. That was, in my opinion, what the German people did, is they just put blinders up and were like, oh, if I don't know it, then it didn't happen. Well, it did happen, and it happened right under their noses. Literally, you can't tell me that you can't smell dead bodies, rotting corpses from the cities and towns surrounding concentration camps like Auschwitz, like Buchenwald. You can't tell me that these people didn't know.
Hatred, cruelty, and dehumanization. Throughout 1943 and 1944, the Nazis accelerated their genocidal plan. Ghettos were liquidated, and Jews from all corners of Nazi-occupied Europe were deported to death camps and murdered. Finally, in 1945, the Russian army reached and liberated Auschwitz. U.S. forces crossed the Rhine, and by April, Berlin was surrounded. Hitler committed suicide, and Germany unconditionally surrendered to the—
The thing that breaks my heart is the fact that they fast-tracked the murder of all of these Jews. Like, they knew they were losing the war, so what did they do? They fast-tracked killing as many Jews as humanly possible by gas chambers, by firing squads. And it's like they were talking, these trains that they would put the Jewish people on were slammed together like sardines. No water, no bathrooms. These poor people ended up having to literally soil themselves if they needed to use the bathroom. So you can imagine, spending 4 or 5 days on this train, and it doesn't have to be moving. Like, these people brought these trains into places like Buchenwald, like Auschwitz, will leave the train car with all these people in it for like 2 days, 3 days. And people would die in there. And what would happen is they just have the people that were still alive pull the dead bodies out with them, take them right over to the incinerators and burn the bodies. And it was just disgusting. It was the most disgusting part of human history that I can ever imagine.
5. The Russian army reached and liberated Auschwitz. U.S. forces crossed the Rhine, and by April, Berlin was surrounded. Hitler committed suicide, and Germany unconditionally surrendered to the Allies.
That's up for debate, if Hitler actually committed suicide or if he fled to Venezuela. It's up to you to decide. A lot of people think he just fled to Venezuela with Eva Braun and killed and murdered a man and a woman and burnt them to death and then called it their suicide.
Forces crossed the Rhine, and by April, Berlin was surrounded. Hitler committed suicide, and Germany unconditionally surrendered to the Allies. By the end of the tragic war, roughly 6 million Jews and 5 million others, including Roma, Poles, homosexuals, the disabled, communists, and political dissidents, had been murdered by Nazis.
See what I was saying? It wasn't just Jews. It was all of those aforementioned people that were murdered.
Homosexuals, the disabled, communists, and political dissidents had been murdered by Nazis. Villages, cities, and towns throughout Europe that were once home to flourishing Jewish communities were now empty of them. Survivors of the concentration and death camps who tried to return home often found their property seized by their non-Jewish neighbors. With no recourse for reclaiming their homes or possessions, they became refugees, many ending up in displaced persons camps before moving on to form what have since become flourishing Jewish communities in the Americas and the land of Israel. The Holocaust was a brutal campaign of persecution and mass murder carried out by the Nazis and their collaborators in an effort to systematically annihilate the entire European Jewish population. The scale of death and destruction is unfathomable. But Jewish communities have since worked tirelessly to care for survivors, name the lost, build and strengthen Jewish life around the world, and educate younger generations about the horrors of the Holocaust so that it never happens again.
It almost brings tears to your eyes to think about all of those people that had their lives ended because of the fact that they were of a certain religion, or were in love with somebody of the same sex, or were crippled, or had any physical or mental ailments, were just murdered. I have epilepsy. I would have been killed. Yes, I'm blonde hair, blue eyed, but it wouldn't matter because I have epilepsy. They would have just killed me the first seizure I had. Back when I was a kid, I went to the Holocaust exhibit up at the Pacific Science Center in Seattle because they had a huge exhibit. They gave us cards and we would go through and we'd kind of follow along the lives of each one of the people that were on our card, and by the end it would tell you whether you lived or died. And it was an amazing experience because you learned so much about one person, one blip in time that really can change your life just from the standpoint of looking through somebody else's eyes throughout history. It breaks your heart. All right, well, with that, I'm going to let you guys go. I hope you guys enjoyed the reaction. If you could do me a favor, go down, hit the like, the subscribe, the little bell icon at the top. That would be fantastic. Also, if you want to donate to the channel, you can do that by going down, hit the super thanks button at the bottom, clicking any one of the links at the top of the video and say click here to donate. All right, we'll see you later. I love you guys.